coding, then characteristics of programming language. Okay, why do we need coding? Now, this question comes every now and then, 8 marks or 7 marks. What are the coding standards and guidelines the programmers need to follow? So you have to know these questions very nicely. All right. So for good software development organizations, generally they have their own coding standards and guidelines. Okay, depending on what suits their organization and type of products to be developed. So, like for example, if you have IBM, maybe they work exclusively maybe in Java framework, isn't it? Or maybe let us take Cognizant, they might work in a different maybe AI machine intelligence kind of. So their machine learning algorithms and frameworks of Python are much more accepted. So depending upon the type of work that an organization is doing, so accordingly the coding, the technology standards also is being chosen as per their requirement. Okay. Now, whenever we are any company chooses a coding standard, then what are the various rules that one needs to know? So rules for limiting the use of global. So these rules list what types of data can be declared global and what cannot. So even in your small kind of languages when you use, okay, when you're using actually in C, C++, Java, or maybe other programming languages. So you know the difference between a variable when it is declared static, when it is declared local in a particular function or within a particular block of statements, or maybe a variable can also be declared global. So whenever we are choosing a particular coding standard, so we need to first know like which of the variables we're using in that particular development of software. Okay, which are the variables we have to make it global so that it can be accessed anywhere from any part of the module or of the program. So that decision has to be taken. Okay, so you all, when you will be making use of the project also, these things are very much handy. If you follow software engineering, I'm telling you, making the project will not be difficult at all. Okay, then contents of the headers preceding codes for different modules. Okay, the information contained in the headers of different modules should be standard in an organization. So whenever one project has got many parts or many modules, then you need to specify that in the form of a header, in the form of a heading, in a more explicit way, so that you understand the requirement and also the people involved in that particular development of the project or in the development of the software, they get a clear idea of what are the various sections or modules that are there. So whenever you are listing out the in the header, like what are the things you require. So first of all, you have to write down the paths that are there, the name of each of the paths or modules, then date on which you intend to start the module work or the part work, the name of the people who are working in different modules. Okay, if suppose the module while working has been updated, that updation record also has to be made, which date, who has updated, okay, what new features has been added, synopsis of the module, like you have to write it down, you have to document it, that what was the need of having this part or module in the project or in the software development, what are the various functions, packages, technology, platform, or maybe even data structures that you have used, okay, for implementing the different modules, along with the information of what are the input data that is being supplied to the software and what are the output which is expected from each of the modules. And also, as we said, that global variables which has been used, which has been accessed, been modified by different modules. Okay. And another thing, naming conventions for global variables, local variables, and constant identifier. So a possible naming convention can be that global variables always start with a capital letter. So that is your personal choice actually. So if you want to differentiate that, you know, while documenting, this is my local variable, this is my global variable, this is a constant identifier or a static variable, then in that case, you can choose your own convention. Like for example, for global variable, you can go with a capital letter, isn't it? To like all the names of global variable can start with a capital letter. So that indirectly will indicate that, okay, this part of the program indicates your global variable. Then local variable names, you can make use of small letters, and constant names are always capital letters, means all. Suppose we have a constant variable or the age. So AGE, okay, entire alphabets are capitalized, okay. Then error return conventions and exception handling mechanisms. So the way error conditions are reported by different functions in a program are handled should be standard within an organization. For example, different functions while encountering an error should return either 0 or 1 consistently. So again, whenever you are making a system, I mean to say a software, so how you are going to handle the exceptions or the errors is up to you, okay. So different people, they use exception handling mechanism or exception handling technique. The best which is we know is in Java or in C++, we use the try catch block of statements, isn't it? So whenever we have a certain piece of code, let's say if we divide any number or any variable by 0, then what is the thing that we can generate? We can generate an exception because anything divided by 0 is undefined. So we write that piece of code which of exception in the try block of statement, and that exception is caught or handled in the catch block. Okay, so I think you must be aware of exception handling, how it is done, okay, in Java or C++. So that is the best example that one can quote, okay, for exception handling mechanism. The following are some representative coding guidelines recommended by software developing organizations. So this is all, these are from a very IT company point of view, okay, it's very practical. So do not use a coding style that is too clever or too difficult to understand. Code should be easy to understand. Many inexperienced engineers or system developers actually take pride in writing cryptic and incomprehensible code. Obscure meaning of the code and hamper understanding. It is also makes maintenance difficult. So that is very, very true. Many people think that, okay, I am so skilled, I am so good, okay, I am the best, okay. So what they do is they write codes in such a way, they feel that writing very complex code, it will make them recognize that they are very strong, okay. But what happens is that is actually not a good practice, because if suppose you are maintaining that code, you have written a particular code, okay, and you need to maintain it, let's say, or you need to upgrade it after 2 years, then you yourself will not understand what you have actually coded, what was the relevance, and what are these things that you are doing, what is the actual thing. Because see, logic is something like which comes now as per the demand of the situation, or it is very spontaneous, isn't it? Logic cannot be created. There is a saying, I guess you all must know, it comes with practice and maybe with experience. So if suppose you have defined the logic, but the flow of the program, you have written it in a very difficult way, thinking that, okay, no one should be able to understand. But what happens in the long run? This hampers yourself only, okay? And maintaining the particular project or that code, if needs to be upgraded, then it becomes difficult, okay? So that has to be taken care. It should not be too difficult, okay, to understand. Then avoid obscursion of side effects. The side effects of a function call include modification of parameters passed by reference, modification of global variables in input-output operations. An obscure effect is one that is not obvious from casual examination of the code. For example, if a global variable is changed obscurely in a call module or some input-output operation is performed, which is difficult to infer from the function name, it becomes difficult when you're trying to understand the code. Okay, so uh, what happens is whenever we are modifying any global variable, or whenever we are performing input output operation, or suppose we are passing arguments by reference, then we need to see that the global variable is not changed to a very large extent, or maybe the modification or whatever the input output operation that is being performed, okay, it becomes quite easy to understand. Like for example, here they are saying if a global variable is changed abruptly in a call module, or some input output operation is performed which is difficult to infer from the function's name and header information, it becomes difficult for anybody trying to understand the code. So what it is trying to say is whenever you are changing anything or performing any kind of operation, then the function which is performing that operation should be able to tell us automatically from the naming itself that what kind of work it is doing. Like for example, let's say if suppose I have a function, let's say display. Okay, I have a function, let's say display. So the name itself, what it tries to tell me that some kind of output or some kind of displaying of certain things is going to take place, isn't it? So display something like that. If suppose we are taking, let's say, read data. Okay, so read data is a function, let's say. Okay, we are coding in C++. So read data means what? We are trying to get the input from the user, isn't it, through keyboard. So from the naming itself, it should be able to tell us indirectly that what kind of work it is going to do, whether it is going to change certain variable, let's say, value, like a global variable value. Let's say in a constructor, we can initialize the value, isn't it? So from there, we know, okay, the initialization of the variables are taking place, okay, or we are assigning certain values. Let's say, for example, if suppose we have a function named IO change, that means certain input output operation is being performed. But let's say in place of IO change, I wrote that only in place of some file input output operation to be performed, I write something else name, let's say display. So it is giving me a wrong information, isn't it? It is not giving a wrong information, but it is not telling me the actual work that basically the function is going to do. We can name the function name, that is not a problem, okay? But what happens is that only if we go inside the code of the function, we will be able to understand, and we have to examine one by one. So we have to take into account, or we have to keep in mind, then whatever work the that particular function is meant to do, then accordingly we have to name it as per accordingly. Okay, so that's why it may lead to obscure effect. That's what it's saying. That means it may lead to a kind of misleading kind of information. Okay, then do not use the same identifier or variable for multiple purposes. Okay, so programmers often use the same identifier to identifier here means variables to denote several temporary entities. For example, some programmers uses a temporary loop variable for calculating and storing the final result. Okay, the rationale is usually given by these programmers for such multiple uses of variables is memory efficiency. Example, three variables use up three memory locations. Okay, and hence should be okay. All right. So here also some of the programmers, even I have this habit, is that one variable process and the justification that is being given by most of the programmers is that if suppose I use memory occupancy will be more, isn't it? So hence, what I'll do, I can make use of one variable or at most two variable and get the work done. But again, this is not a very good approach, and hence it should be avoided. And why it should be avoided? They have stated the reasons also. Each variable should be given a descriptive name. So every variable actually has a purpose. Okay. So if suppose one variable is forfeiting all the purposes, then what may happen? It may lead to confusion. Okay, not now. While coding, it's fine, but while maintaining it later part, that time to understand and to read the code becomes very difficult. And suppose if you have left the project or an organization, and if someone has to carry over or take over, then it becomes much more difficult. Okay, use of variables for multiple purposes, as I said, will hinder the future enhancements. Okay, then the code should always be well documented. Okay, so that is very correct. The length of any function should not exceed 10 source lines. A function that is very lengthy is generally very difficult to understand. Okay, so we should try to see that the lines of codes or the source lines should be quite less. Okay, using go-to statements makes a program very unstructured and the flow is hindered. So that try to avoid go-to statements as much as you can. Okay, and it makes become. So from here, this question is okay, like you can ask what is coding, then you can add this in your question, characteristics of programming language. And this is very important. What are the various coding standards and guidelines? Okay. So this you will be, you can expect in your class test number 2. Okay. This coding part. Then certain terms that one must be familiar is the code review and code walkthroughs. Okay. So code review for any particular software is basically carried out after the module is successfully compiled and all the syntax errors has been, this should be coding code module. Okay. So code review actually is, what is it saying? It is for any module, is, some messages are there. Uh, Code review basically is refers to a module. Okay, so this basically takes place when a module is successfully compiled and all the syntax errors uh, uh, is successfully compiled and all the syntax errors has been eliminated. Okay, so whenever one module is developed, you need to review it, and how you are reviewing, you need to compile it first and check if there are certain syntax errors or not. If there are, you need to correct it. If not, then you have to move forward. Okay. So code reviews are extremely cost-effective strategies. Okay, because it reduces the coding errors and you can optimize it also to produce good quality code. Okay. So code reviews, again, technique, there are two: code inspection and code walkthroughs. Okay, so code walkthrough also is being asked in the examination. So code walkthrough is an informal code analysis technique. In this technique, after a module has been coded, successfully compiled and all syntax errors are eliminated. So in this case, what happens is, basically when a module is being coded, compiled, okay, so we check if there are certain syntactical errors. If there are, then we need to remove it. A few members of the development team are given the code few days back before the walkthrough meeting to read and understand code. So who has developed the code or the system, he doesn't do it. There is a particular other team members in the company who basically checks if there are certain bugs or errors which is there. Okay, so what does that team does? Like each member from the team selects some of the modules or test cases and it executes the code. Okay, to check if every statement and function is executed perfectly or not. If there are certain errors, then that is being pointed out. Okay, so the main aim basically of conducting this walkthrough is to check that if any logical errors, or if suppose they have used any algorithm, according to that algorithm we are getting that output or not. Okay, so based on that, that is the reason they are checking it, that if it is in sync or not. Okay, so once these members find out that these are the issues, then they will note it down and will pass it to the development team. Okay, so that this can be done. Sometimes they make the correction. So it actually depends from organization to organization what they need to do. Okay, now in the code walkthrough, these certain things that one needs to follow are the guidelines, that the team performing this code walkthrough should not be either very big or very small. Okay, it should consist of in between 3 to 7 members only. Discussion should focus on discovering of errors. So discussion should be more focused on how the errors to be discovered, and we need to be checked point by point if certain problems are there or not. In order to foster cooperation, if so, and to avoid the feeling among engineers that they are being evaluated to meeting, managers should not attend the walkthrough meetings. Okay, so this is again from the human resources point of view. So one needs to see that that feeling that engineers, they should have that flexibility and openness, that they should be able to conduct this code walkthrough, okay, meetings in absence of the project managers. Okay, otherwise they will not be comfortable and they will not be able to do the work correctly. So maybe code inspection and other things I'll do tomorrow. It's also very large. That's it. These are important some of the things. So anything else?